Good evening, and welcome to this week's edition of The Message. I'm your host, Donatus King. We'll spend this next hour with one purpose in mind, and that one purpose is delivering the message that God is Almighty. Everything that ever was, is now, or ever will be, is a piece of God. Everything that ever was, is now, or ever will be, was made by God. Everything that ever happened, is happening right now, or ever will happen, was made to happen by God. God is master plan for all time and all creation. God is Almighty. The message is brought to you by, is produced by the Society of Knowledge. The Society is an interdenominational ministry. Our members come from various different religious and spiritual backgrounds. We have various different religious and spiritual beliefs. Although we come from different backgrounds and have different beliefs, there's one belief that we share. There's one piece of knowledge that we hold in common, and that's the knowledge that there is a being. By no matter what name we may have been taught to call that being, by no matter what name we may have come to know that being, whether that name be God, Allah, Yahweh, Jesus, Jehovah, Buddha, nature, by no matter what name, we know that there is a being that possesses not some of the power, not most of the power, but all of the power. We know that there is indeed an almighty being. That's the reason we do this show, and the only reason we do this show, and that's to deliver the message that that being that personally I call God, that being is indeed almighty. Today is July the 28th. There's today's date. Our religious spiritual study, as I said earlier, Nubian warrior queens. That's our discussion topic tonight. And we will not have those words of inspiration. Our words of inspiration tonight will come from Professor Hurd and the information that she's going to share with us. You see on your screen right now, that's our main website. That's www.godisalmighty.org. I invite you and encourage you to lock that into your web browser. And 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, you can visit our website, and there are links to all of our social media platforms. We have Facebook, we have a blog, a Twitter, Instagram, YouTube, TikTok. So you don't have to write all that down. Just go to our main website, and there are links that you can click on, and it'll take you to all of our social media platforms. Our Lafayette, Louisiana Center of the Society, and that's presided over by Messenger Ryan King. Our Opelousas Center, and we have centers that are located in Lafayette, in New Orleans, in Lafayette, in Opelousas. And our Opelousas Center is presided over by Messenger Corey Levier. And our North Carolina Center is presided over by Messenger Tainav L. COVID-19, again, I'm encouraging everyone to please get vaccinated. The Imani Temple, number 49 of the African American Catholic Congregation, and that's located in Lafayette, Louisiana. And Sister Nicole, we see that you're joining us, and we're going to bring you into the waiting room right now. And in a minute, we'll be finished with these announcements. Imani Temple, number 28 of the African American Catholic Congregation, as Bishop presided over by Bishop Wendy Mee. And that temple is located here in the city of New Orleans. Previously recorded episodes of The Message can be watched on television, the Cox Cable Orleans Channel 76 on Wednesdays at 1 p.m. and Thursdays at 7:30 p.m. Central, and on YouTube at DNK Messenger. For those of you that are watching and joining us by Facebook, I invite you and I encourage you, hit the like button, hit the share button, and start a watch party. Help us deliver this message. You see on your screen now, that's our billboard, and that billboard is located here in the city of New Orleans. And as you see the sign, what it says, God is Almighty, delivering that message, God is Almighty. The Society has a fellowship and a celebration every second and fourth Sunday. We had a great time this past Sunday was the fourth Sunday. And that fellowship, our next fellowship will be August 14th, and that'll be 10 a.m. And we meet now at Imani Temple number 28. That's 2411 Treasure Street here in the city of New Orleans. We have refreshments, and you don't have to be a member to join or to come. It's open to the public. Come and join our fellowship. Religious spiritual study, prove all things, hold fast that which is good. Welcome, Professor Hurd.
Okay, very good. All right, so I'm going to pick back up from where we left off 2 weeks ago, talking about the Nubian warrior queens. So we talked about the major archaeological periods of Nubian history, and we focused on this period last time, the Kushite period. But what I did not do was to actually orient us to the larger category of Nubian women, royal women. So when I generally discuss the Nubian queens, I place them within the context of other Nubian women, and that categorization usually I talk about queens, princesses, and queen mothers. But when I really get into talking about the women, it's the queens, the princess priestesses, and venerated mothers. So the venerated mothers, or I call them venerated mothers because the queen mothers had this really high status in Nubian society. This is Queen Mother Kalhata, so she was the mother of the last of the 25th dynasty kings. The 25th dynasty kings were the kings from Kush that also ruled Egypt. So these queen mothers were given elaborate burials by their sons. So this is wall painting from the inside of her pyramid that was constructed by her son. But generally, when I talk about the queen mothers, I recognize them as having different roles in Kushite society. So this is from a stela or a tablet of King Aspelta as he's being crowned king. So it has religious implications because we have him being crowned by the god Amun and the goddess Mut. It's also a religious implication for his mother. So his mother is this woman that's standing here with these rattles, they're called sistra. And so she is shaking the rattles before the gods as her son is being crowned king in this ceremony. So she's also acting as a priestess. She's here not so much in her capacity as his mother, but she's acting as a priestess. But we also understand that she is his mother, and that's the reason why she's there. But this is also a political moment because her son is being crowned king. So he is the authority over the Nubian Kushite kingdom. And it's political, she's exercising a political role also because of the titles that she holds within this ceremony. So she is seen as what we have here, the Senet Nesut. So she's the sister of the king. Here is the title Mut Nesut. So she's the mother of the king. But the title that is most important for her and for her son is this Senet Nesut, the sister of the king. So all of these kings that we see crowned in these stelae like this, their mothers have that title, sister of the king. So she has a political role, but she also has a social role because she is a woman. And so it's not very typical to see, especially if you look at this scene, it looks very Egyptian, but we don't normally see women, particularly mothers, in the presence of the gods. And not only is she in the presence of the gods, but she's also talking to the god, asking the god to recognize her son and accept not her son, but to accept his son. She doesn't even call him her son because she's acting as a priestess, but asking the God to accept his son as king and to crown him king and to give him long life and health. So this is the king of Sparta. He was king from around 593 to 568 BC. So these are, early times, ancient times. This is also another stela from King Horsiotep, who's another of the Nubian kings, Kushite kings. And there we see his mother, the Mutnesut, and King Nastasen. And in all of these, they're presenting before the gods, but their mothers are there with them as they're making these offerings to the gods. And she's shaking the sistra, making music for the god. So she's acting as a priestess, and you can see she's also here pouring a water offering or a libation. So these women, these mothers have a very high status, so much so that when the king goes before the god in these ceremonial, when he's being accepted or crowned as king, his mother is there accompanying him. So we see this theme of these venerated queen mothers that we see in the early Napatan periods, the Kushite periods, but they also continue well into the Christian period. So these are from the church at Pharos in Nubia. So there is a Christian period in Nubia. And we also see that in these depictions from the churches, you also see depictions of the queen mothers. At Jebel Barkal, which is the site, the main religious site for most of the entirety of the Kushite kingdom, there are a number of temples at the foot of this mountain, but a couple of them are built inside the mountain. So they excavated the rock inside the mountain to create temples inside. And so there's a temple to the goddess Mut that was built by the king Taharka. And on some of the walls, we see him making presentations to the high god Amun and to the goddess Mut. But behind him here, while he's making this offering, again, is his mother. And so she's acting again as priestess, but she's there also in her capacity as mother. So this is an actual picture of the inside of that temple. On the other wall, we see the king Taharka making presentation to another manifestation of the god Amun. So I don't have time to talk about the different manifestations of the supreme god in Nubia. But this particular manifestation is associated with the mountain. And there are some archaeologists that see the mountain, the outline of the mountain in this drawing. So here he's making a presentation to the god, but behind him is his wife. So the queens, some of the queens also had exalted roles. So this is this Kushite period from around 850 to 350 AD that we've been focusing on. So if we do the breakdown of these roles, the queens are the wife of the king. Queens can also be ruling queens. So we talked about that last week, and we'll get back to that because those are the warrior queens. And they also act as ceremonial priestess. So we saw that in some of the drawings. The princesses are, of course, the daughters of the king. They can also be sisters of a king. They act as ceremonial priestess, as we see with some of the queens, but they can also act as priestesses, true priestesses in the temples. The venerated mothers, or the queen mothers, of course, are the mother of the king. They also can be sisters of the king and almost all of them are a sister of the king. And sister could mean full-blooded sister, but it also could represent a female, close female relative. So maybe a cousin of the king. But they also could act as ceremonial priestesses, as we just saw. So the princess priestess of the most, the best example we have of that is, and that did not turn out right. So that was supposed to be in hieroglyphics. They had that on my computer. But the God's wife of Amun. So that was the high priestess that we have during the middle, at the 25th dynasty with the Kushites. They were presenting their daughters, some of the kings would present their daughters to the temple at Thebes in Egypt, and they would succeed each other after the death of the previous God's wife. But they would act as a priestess, the high priestess. So they were in control of the resources of the temple economy. The temples had their own property, they had their own resources. And so the person that was in charge of the temples had control over that. So there was a time in Egyptian history prior to this where the high priest had become so powerful that they could launch their own dynasty. And that did happen in the second intermediate period. But in order to make sure that the priests did not exercise independent power from the pharaoh, the God's wife was recreated as this position of the high priestess. So she was actually the person in control of all of the resources of these, the temple complex, the temple economy. So the first of the Kushite princesses to serve in this capacity was Amenertes I. She was the daughter of Kashta, who was the predecessor of the first king that united Egypt and Kush. And as you can see, they had statues. Their names were written in cartouches like the pharaoh. They received elaborate burials like the kings. They had these usheptes, which were these little statuettes that were placed in the burials. So the royal kings and queens would have these in their tombs, and so would these God's wives. And Amenertes even had her own personal assistant. So this stela is actually from the burial of this young woman who was her personal assistant. So these women had a great deal of power. And so here is Amenertes, a scene from her burial where she's being escorted into the afterlife. She was succeeded by Shepenwepet II, who was the daughter of Pianki, who was the first king of the united Kushite Egyptian state. And it was her role as successor to plan and execute the burial for her aunt, Amenertes. So this is a scene from that burial showing the Amenertes, who is now an ancestor, and Shepenwepet, who is making an offering before her aunt. And they were also temple builders. So these women were not only had power, but they exercised it in ways that that was not probably not typical for a lot of women in the ancient world. So this shows more than likely this was Amenertes, the God's wife, with the king Taharka. So this is in a structure that they don't really understand what the structure was built for, but it is a sacred structure that's in Egypt. But it shows the king and he's throwing balls, but she is shooting arrows to the shooting 4 arrows, so basically to the cardinal points. So north, south, east, and west. So she's providing protection for Taharka as he's engaging in these ritual ceremonies. So here we see her again. She's supporting the statues of the gods as they are being carried in this ceremony. And here she is again, as he's making a presentation to the god that's in this, being carried in this sacred structure. Here she is at the back of this, this row of priests. So you have all these priests that are escorting, and here she is here, and she's also here in this back picture. And so even the princesses who were not particularly God's wives were ceremonial priestesses when they would have certain events where they would bring the gods out for a display. When they would have these ritual ceremonies, then the princesses, as you see here, would also participate as priestesses. So going back to the reigning queens, which is where we started when we were talking about the queens, we focused on these queens of the Meroitic period because this is the period when we had, or when we have a concentration of women serving in that role as ruler. The one that we did not talk about last week was Amanirenas, and that is because during her reign, we know that she actually did go to battle. She did go into war with opposing forces. So we saw representations of these other queens in warrior poses, but we don't have any evidence that they actually went to war. But we do know that Amanirenas was involved in war. So I saved her for this week so we could talk about her and place her in a different context. So we're going to talk about reigning warrior queens. Before we get to the Kushite period, which is around 850 AD, we have earlier women who are exercising authority as political leaders. So during this period called the A group, which is going along the same time period as the Old Kingdom in Egypt, we know that there was at least one woman that was leading a group of people that were in Nubia. These are called execration. So, I mean, it's almost the precursor of what some would say the voodoo doll. But these execration figurines were created going back during the Old Kingdom. But what they would do is they would make these figurines and then place, curses or whatever on them to, as a way of dealing with an enemy. And sometimes they would be buried, but it was all very symbolic. So they found these cache of execration figurines around in the Giza area, around near where the pyramids are. And these dated back to around the 5th or 6th dynasty. This particular cache, where they looked at the writing that was on the figurines, one of the figurines had something that was a little bit different. So if you can see here, this, what looks like a shepherd's staff is the word Heka. So that's the word that's used to basically signify a ruler, but a foreign ruler, not necessarily an Egyptian ruler. So a Heka is sometimes it's interpreted as prince, but basically it means foreign ruler. So it's it could be a chief, but it's someone who is ruling that's not a ruler of Egypt. So during this time period, considering that we're talking about Nubia, Nubia had a number of different groups of people, a number of tribes of people. There wasn't a large unified state at that time. So what we have with these execration figures is a number of Nubian tribes that are being named as enemies, basically, of Egypt. So this one actually, though, has the T ending. The noun with a T ending feminizes it. So it's not a heka, it's a hekat. And so you could say, well, was that a mistake? Hekat in Iamis, and then you have the name Satit, and this, what you have at the end, so that symbolizes, the determinative, if it's male or female. This is a female at the end of this here. And then the other nouns all signify that the person that they're talking about is feminine. So it's Hekat, or the ruler of Iamnis, Satit, born of her mother. Again, using the feminine. So, and then it talks about, here towards the end, can't get my, okay, Mesha, which means army or troops, S. And that dependent pronoun S, again, is feminine. So it's her army or her troops. So they're talking about a female ruler that has her own troops. And she was so significant that they actually made an execration figure to curse her. Another female ruler that we have is during the reorganization period. So this period right before it, New Kingdom colonization, is when the Egyptian pharaohs during the 18th dynasty come down into Nubia and conquer all of Nubia and bring it into the Egyptian empire. Because at that time, Egypt expanded far north into Syria, and then south and into all of Nubia. At the end of the colonization period, when the Nubians regained their freedom, there's about a 200-year period where they're trying to kind of reorganize. And so we're trying to figure out what was going on during that time period. There is an inscription that was found on the side of a wall of a temple with this queen, and her name is Katamalo or Katamala, depending on whether you pronounce it as a T or a D. Some words in Meroitic, it's believed that the T actually was a D, so it could be Katamalo or Katamala. But in this inscription, she talks about the fact that the previous ruler, so previous ruler was either her father or her husband, had been ineffective. Someone had been coming year after year, demanding tribute and stealing from them, and they had been just basically letting it happen. So after the death of the previous ruler, she became ruler, and she was saying that the council even asked her, would she be ruler? And as ruler, she decided that she was going to put her foot down, like, we're not going to let anybody come into our territory and take from us. So she engaged in battle. She fought off the invaders and then turned around and invaded them. And so she's giving offerings here to the goddess Isis, but in the inscription, she's basically talking about how ineffective the men had been and how she stood up and took back what they had stolen from them, and that she was presenting it to the god Amun as, you know, as his, like, these are things that belong to us and it belong to you, and I'm giving it back to you. So she was showing her strength, but that she was ready and that she did engage in battle to win back and protect what was theirs. So we get to Amanirenas, and we don't have any depictions of this queen, any drawings or artistic renderings. But what we do have is from the Roman Strabo, and some other writers have talked about her. And so what we have from Strabo's description of her is that she was one-eyed queen. So she had lost an eye, possibly in battle. And he described her as masculine. So we'll have to talk about why is it that a Roman man would see an African woman as masculine, because she was a warrior. But the reason why she is recorded in Roman history is because during, right after Rome takes over Egypt, after the fall of Cleopatra to Octavian, and Octavian becomes Caesar Augustus, there had always been this move towards Lower Nubia. So that border region that I described earlier, that's a part of modern day Egypt, that had fluctuated back and forth between Nubia. So the Egyptians had always wanted to take that. And it also created a buffer zone between them and the Nubians further south, the Kushites. But the Romans, during that time period, the Nubians, the Kushites, moved back north to retake Lower Nubia from Egypt. And then the Romans pushed back. And so there was this back and forth between the Kushites and the Romans. In the meantime, the queen actually was in battle with her troops. So she was not in Merowe telling them what to do. She was actually engaged in battle. And it got to the point, going back and forth so much, that Octavian, Caesar Augustus, was like, look, have that woman send ambassadors and we'll just do a peace treaty. So in the end, she sent representatives to Rome, and they executed a peace treaty with the Roman Empire. And they got everything that they wanted. So if you think about that, this woman who is described as being masculine and one-eyed, she was a fierce warrior that went up against Rome and got what she wanted. So with that, I will end. And we can open up for discussion and questions.
No, all right. Let's see if I can. All right. Well, Doctor, thank you. And I'm going to see if I can unmute myself here.
You're unmuted.
Okay. All right. Okay. There are a number of things that you touched on, number of topics, and I just wanted to go into those a little bit. When you and I spoken previously, you expressed to me that one of your undertakings was to actually learn how to read the hieroglyphs for yourself. And I'm noticing that a lot of the carvings, hieroglyphs, have you had the opportunity to actually interpret those yourself? And as opposed to, relying on someone else's interpretation?
Yeah, so that's what I'm working on my dissertation. I'm looking at 4 different temples. 2 of them are written with using Egyptian hieroglyphics. So I am actually sitting down and doing the translations myself. They've been translated, but I'm doing them myself and then going back and looking to see, what someone else translated it as.
Right. Yeah. And when is there a book that shows that, this falcon pointing in a certain direction, that means X, Y, Z? How do you actually learn how to read hieroglyphs?
So there are a number of Egyptian grammars that you can use. A lot of people start off using Gardner because Gardner was one of the first. Well, he was probably the first to do it in English. Mm-hmm. But there are some others that more recently that people use that are probably more accessible for us and employ more recent knowledge than Gardner. So there's James Allen. A lot of people use his book, starting off in Middle Egyptian. The other thing is that there are different phases of the Egyptian language. So people can start off, a lot of people start off with Middle Egyptian and then work forwards and backwards. So there's Late Egyptian, then there's Coptic. So that's used by the Coptic Church. And then there's Old Egyptian, so the oldest phase of the language. So a lot of people usually end up though starting with Middle because the verbal system is more fleshed out in that middle period, and then working towards the changes that happen in Late Egyptian.
Yeah, Doctor, this is, I'm going all over the place on my questions and my comments, but I was noticing something in those carvings. I'm looking at your hairstyle, and it appeared to me, maybe my screen wasn't real clear, but it appeared to me that in those carvings, a number of the queens had a similar hairstyle, had braids. Is it just my computer or what?
No, the braid goes back thousands of years. Braids, wigs, extensions. I can show you and these are some of the Nubian queens in Egypt getting their hair done. And you see, the person has a pin there and she has like a little piece of hair that she's about to attach to her hair. So weave all of, as they say, what's old, what's new has already been here. What's old is new. There's nothing new under the sun. So, so the Egyptian Museum, they actually have these elaborate wigs with braids. And actually there's a Nubian warrior that was buried that had hair, and we thought it was his hair, but it was glued to his head. So I guess his head had been shaved, had glued it, but it was like in little spirals. So it looked like his naturally curly hair.
All right. When you're saying that, I'm not sure, but I think nowadays you can see, women and some men, have what they call lace fronts or something. Is that what it is?
Yeah.
So that's going back 1,000 years, huh?
Yes.
Well, look, all right, now hold on, Doc. You wasn't trying to make any suggestion.
Oh, no.
You know what? All right. I'm proud of this, but anyway, there are a couple of things I want to touch on before we go any further. And that's, I'm here in New Orleans. And in New Orleans, New Orleans, the history of New Orleans, the practice of voodoo, and the practice of using, the voodoo dolls.
Mm-hmm.
And you mentioned about the execration
Mm-hmm.
figurines.
Mm-hmm.
Now, can you tell just a little bit more about it? And it's no coincidence as far as tracing voodoo and the things that are done in New Orleans, those practices having a corollary or having some roots in Nubia and Egypt.
Well, I mean, I don't know that I haven't traced that. That would be an interesting project. But yeah, those execration figurines. I mean, you have to think about a lot of what the Egyptians did, especially the Old Kingdom. I'm the thing that I'm really focused on, and it's going to be like a lifelong journey, is origins. Like, what is the origin of this practice, or what is the origin of this religious symbol? And so when we look at some of the oldest uses of writing in this fashion, it was believed that if you wrote it, then it could come to pass.
Mm-hmm.
So like, even if you scratched out somebody's name, that was a way to try to scratch them out of existence.
Mm-hmm.
So even like snakes were seen, some snakes were seen as being very dangerous. So the representation of certain snakes, like in the afterlife. Mm-hmm. And so you will see some carvings where they're actually there's a cut through the snake, even though it's carved perfectly, but then there's cut through it to make it less effective, Mm-hmm. So with these execration figurines, they wrote on them the bad things that they wanted to happen to them. So it was like, I have an enemy, and so I'm going to deal with the enemy in a supernatural way. Mm-hmm. So, and it wasn't necessarily that they had anything against a certain group of people. Sometimes it was just a way of creating this idea that the Egyptians were superior to everyone else, and that that they could conquer everyone else. Mm-hmm. So it was a way of saying, if I come across this tribe, this group of people, I'll conquer them. I'll wipe them out of existence. Things of that sort. But so it was more of a thing of creating like this battle, I guess you could say, supernaturally.
Mm. It's interesting that you use that term, supernatural, and it's interesting, and this is going to segue right into making this connection with the religious and spiritual to what we've been speaking about with the figurines. I've come to the understanding, Doctor, and the knowledge that a lot of what we might classify as being supernatural is actually natural. And I'm just, the spirit moved me during your presentation with the figurines. In the comment that you made, that amongst certain cultures, there was a belief that writing, the act of writing something down actually had an impact on an outcome. And bringing that from a supernatural concept, and bringing the queens from out of the religious and spiritual context into a secular scientific context, that maybe there is something to being able to focus your energy focus your thoughts. And I know that there have been studies that have been done, medical studies, scientific studies that have been done as folks in certain periods of prayer, how they're actually physical changes to their brains and their brain waves and patterns, and whether or not these figurines, these execrations, the voodoo dolls, would be just a tool that had been learned how to be used to actually effectuate something that went beyond maybe what we know that we know now as far as science.
And let me say this too, because and I probably should clarify a bit. It's not so much that the writing created the change or affected the change. It was the writing and then speaking the words.
Mm-hmm.
Because the writing itself was called Medu Neter, which is the divine words or words of the gods. So mm-hmm. even the writing itself was deemed sacred. Mm-hmm. But what actualized it was the speaking of it. So mm-hmm. you could write it, but it became effective when you spoke it.
You spoke it, so right.
Reading the words made it effective.
Right, right. And along that same vein, when you speak, you're sending out, you're communicating with waves, mm-hmm. with sound waves when you speak. And as we know that the brain emits waves. Well, see, we going a little bit further
and actually there is a book, because you had some sources last time I was on, but there's this book, Medu Neter, by Dr. Jacob Carruthers, who's out of Chicago with the Kemetic Institute. And he talks about divine words, but also divine speech. So Medu Nefer, so actually speaking good speech. Right. And that's another level of it. Is your speech good?
Right. I'm familiar, not as familiar as I should be, with the book. The messenger Ryan out of Lafayette actually introduced me to that. But there's before, because this hour goes fast. Yeah. But there was an issue that I wanted to discuss with you, and it's good that we can discuss it on there. I was just doing a little research, a little studying, and one of the things that the Aswan Dam, when it was built, and there were some questions that were raised as to the true purpose of the dam, and the area that was flooded by the dam, and whether, the significance of what actually lies below that body of water now that's covering that up. Is there a particular branch of archaeology now that you're familiar with that's looking into that?
No. So that area that you're talking about, that's part of Lower Nubia. Mm-hmm. So that's part of that area that I was talking about, that the Romans and the Cushites were fighting over, but it's a part of Nubia. Mm-hmm. That whole thing was just tragic, because modern day Nubians actually lived there. Mm-hmm. So they were displaced. They had been living there for generations, on the banks of the Nile, and they were displaced and moved into these regions where they weren't close to the water. So they lost, a lot of their cultural heritage, and they put them up in places. They would paint their houses very elaborately, have, beautiful paintings, but they were placed like in these concrete shelters that didn't look anything like what they lived in before. So it was very it has been very painful for them because they've lost so much. And they actually have their own language. So there are different dialects of Nubian that is spoken today. But those that are in Egypt, their children are forced to learn or to speak Arabic in the schools. Mm-hmm. So there actually is a push now for Nubians to reclaim their culture and to hold on to their language. Right. There was so much that was lost. When they built that dam, that was the largest salvage excavation that had ever been held in the world. Mm-hmm. And you had archaeological teams come from all over the world to help, to try to help excavate, but they still could not have gotten most of the material that was there. They took, like the larger temples, like the Temple of Ramses II and Nefertari was moved so that it wouldn't be flooded. Some of those larger temples were cut. Some of them ended up, like one of them is in the Metropolitan Museum in New York. But there's so much that was lost.
Right, and I question what knowledge could be buried under all that water right now. And particularly, there was something about that area, and if I'm correct as far as what I read, that there were certain cataracts in that area, and archaeologists has found that even though those cataracts were effective barriers to moving up and down the river, that there were still fortresses built on the sides of the river. And there's been some question as to the necessity of having those fortresses built. And now we may never know what was so precious about that area because of the flooding now.
Well, the fortresses were built by the kings of the 12th dynasty. Mm-hmm. And what they were doing, we know that the first Kushite kingdom was becoming more powerful. So some archaeologists, Egyptologists believe that the Egyptians were there trying to regulate trade because, most of the gold that the Egyptians had came from Nubia. Mm-hmm. And also coming from the Eastern Desert. But a lot of trade that came and all the trade that was coming from further in Africa was coming down through Nubia, down the Nile River. And so part of it was to regulate trade. That was also a meeting point coming in from the deserts, especially those people that were mining gold. They were coming, that was the point where they were coming in, because that second cataract was the most formidable of the cataracts. I mean, it wasn't impossible to get past it. People had always been getting past it, but it was hard to get past it on a boat. Mm-hmm. Right. So some of it was regulation of trade, but also some of it was an attempt to keep the Nubians out of Egypt because they were becoming more powerful. Yeah.
Right. Well, Doctor, it's let's say that the time has flown. I've enjoyed having you on the message for the past couple of weeks, and I'm looking forward that this will not be your last time on the message, and the information that you have is so immense that it's hard to break it down into a format, a 45, 50-minute format. It's like going to one college lecture and trying to learn the whole course in one lecture. But you've done a fantastic job. I want to thank you for what you've done. And hopefully this will be something recurring that you'll be able to come and present some different information to us in the future and in the near future. I also want to thank you for the contacts that you're reaching out and letting folks know about the message, letting them know what we're doing down here. And if any of our viewers wanted to get in touch with you, is there any email address or website or anything that they can contact you, or you prefer them to just get in touch with us and we'll put them in touch with you? However you like to do that, Doc.
Okay, let's see. I can put one of my email addresses in the chat. Nubian87@gmail.com.
All right. So that's Nubian87@gmail.com. And if any of our viewers that are watching live now or watch it in the future, if you don't have an opportunity to write that down, well, it'll be recorded, so you can always play it back. Right now. That's a good thing. Again, Doctor, thank you. Thank you for joining us.
One thing that I wanted to leave with, though, before we close, I brought up the fact that Amana Reines was called masculine by Strabo when he talked about her, and so I just wanted to revisit that. We can't allow other people that are not a part of don't share our cultural logic to tell us how to feel and to react to each other. So the fact that a Roman man would view a woman, an African woman that was fighting for her nation, as masculine, I think is something. I mean, we have to really unpack that, because if we think about the way that Black women are characterized today as being, they're out there fighting, trying to preserve our rights, trying to protect our children, but they're seen as aggressive, as being mean-spirited. And so we just can't allow other people who don't share a cultural logic to define who we are and who we are to each other. So that's just what I want to end with.
All right. Dr. Deborah Hurd, a modern day Nubian warrior queen. Thank you. Thank you, Doctor.
Thank you.
All right. And we hope that you all have enjoyed tonight's presentation. We're going to close the show out now. And as always, my prayer is that God continues to bless you. And no matter whatever is coming up in this week, that God blesses you and yours with peace. Until we meet again here next week on The Message. And yes, I'm going to bug Deborah Hurd. I'm going to bug her to get her back on the show. And until we meet again here next week on The Message, may God Almighty bless you and yours with peace.